build a working human doctor, right? So there's a user interface which will basically ask them questions, get the answers, and remember them. And this working memory was the information about a particular patient. So once I have asked the patient whether whether he has what is his current temperature, I will actually store things like temperature equal to 100, number of days equal to 1 week, and age is this. So this information, I call it a working memory because when the next patient comes, I will actually get rid of all this and reinitialize my working memory. My rule base is constant, but the working memory can be changed, right? So the user interface collects this information and stores it in the working memory. The inference engine uses the working memory and the rule base to come up with inferences, right? And the explanation facility, like I told you, it will look at the rules and kind of paraphrase it in a common English for people to understand. So this was actually a workable model. So for example, we had built a system called Hruday in those times. It's a simple hard diseases advisor. So its model was like this. Usually, of course, there is something called the basic information that you can ask the person. So, how old are you? What is your primary complaint? Okay, so you may say chest pain. I have nausea. I have this, etc. So using that, you realize that okay, he has some problem which is related to heart problem. So let me explore more, right? So these are the usual ischemic heart disease risk factors. If you are a smoker, you are drinking, you are obese, you have a sedentary job, you have a managerial job, and even that the fact that you are a male at some risk, if you are age is also a risk factor. So these bunch of things. So you have simple rules which says that if number of cigarettes is greater than let's say 3, then risk equal to 0.3. So you get about 30% risk if you smoke more than 3 cigarettes, and if you have similarly number of drinks is greater than whatever 2 or 3 or whatever, then you get some risk. So you could write rules for establishing the risk of having an ischemic heart disease. You have also things like if you have chest pain, then you have the task of is to identify whether this chest pain is related to some stomach upset or is it because of heart problems, right? So you will check whether you had a heavy meal the previous night, then possibly the chest pain could be because of that, right? And things like that. Okay. Similarly, you ask the location of the chest pain. If it is on the left or center, it may be cardiac related, but if it is on the right side, it is not cardiac related. So there are rules which analyzes cardiac symptoms, and using these, you create a suspicion that you may be having ischemic heart disease or congenital heart disease. It is called a corporal and things like that, right? Well, if you have basic suspicion, then you ask more serious questions, right? Have you got blood test done recently? Have you got ECG done recently, or something like that? You can ask, and then use that to establish, get a more serious conclusion about the disease. And depending on the disease, I can generate advices. So if I suspect that you have ischemic heart disease and I see that you are smoking, I may ask you to cut down smoking, or I may say that okay, you seem to have some worrying problem, so please consult a doctor immediately, right? So this was actually a system done by NCST CDAC at that time. Just we took expertise from some cardiologists also in the process. So about 100 plus rules, basic questions for lifestyle and common symptoms, and it actually come up with a routine advice on suspicions of HS problem. Okay, so this was something that was feasible. It was something doable once you have a shell like with one or there are standard expert system shells. You could just load rules on top of it and build systems. But as I said, one of the challenge was this knowledge acquisition bottleneck. How do I get these rules and the kind of expertise that is available? So this kind of was a challenge, but nonetheless, a lot of systems did get developed at that time. So many systems were developed in this on different aspects. If you look at medical expert systems literature, you will find a lot of those examples. One of the properties of this work was that all of these were on very narrow domains. Okay, which was something that was also worked against this field you went to, let's say, a pub assumes that you have a pulmonary problem, right? If you went with, let's say, an eye disease, or you went with some ENT is kind of related, let's say some stomach related problem, pup can actually get confused, right? Because pup is very good with pulmonary diseases. It's like the doctors today also, like, you have a an ENT specialist which works on one aspect, then you have a eye specialist, you have a brain specialist, you have a chest specialist, you have a stomach specialist. So kind of like that, this captured expertise on a very narrow domain. Okay, but then if you go to an ENT doctor with, let's say, a stomach problem, he at least knows enough to go and say, no, this actually is not my area, go and talk to somebody in the stomach area, right? But these systems actually lack that general ability of understanding of the domain. So this was a problem, but within that, it did a wonderful job. It actually achieved very high performance levels comparable to the experts in that domain within the area that it was supposed to do. So performance level was very good. It could explain the reasoning in a reasonably acceptable way. Okay, as I said, by reproducing the rules, it was a mechanical process, but still provided a reasonably understandable way why some particular conclusion was reached or it was not reached. One of the challenges that health area particularly has is uncertainty, right? So, like I put those rules which said that if you have yellow eyes, then it may be jaundice. But yellow eyes could also be that if you go to the doctor after playing Holi, your yellow eyes could actually be because of Holi, for example, right? So, every association of the symptom to disease or the medicine to some disease are conditional on certain assumptions. Very often, even the assumptions are not completely known. Okay, under exactly what conditions can you prescribe and what conditions you should not prescribe is not known to everyone, right? In most areas. But there are the rules actually says that in most of the cases you can do that. So uncertainty was a very important element there. Which again today you see that most of the time you're going to follow probability as the way to model uncertainty today with rules and things like that. Okay. So we had created ideas like certainty factors, fuzzy rules, and Bayesian models and all that were used to capture uncertainty. There's a lot of wonderful stories we can tell about expert systems and medicine. So one basically to say that there is AI which is different from the deep learning or the data-driven AI that we're going to talk most of the course about. But there is AI in human ways of modeling intelligence, like using things like that. Okay, so that was actually something very successful. But then why did it not change the world? One, it was technology ahead of its time. 1970 and all that, how many hospitals would have had a computer, right? Even people didn't have access to computers. So computers were still very geeky niche area. So it was very difficult to get adoption, and buying a computer was like a fortune as we invested. So nobody was excited about doing something like that. Today, I think there is obviously much better situation with respect to all this. And the computers at that time were very primitive compared to what you have today. So the kind of performance and analysis that was required was difficult to do. And I mean, there are things like CT scans, MRI scans, digital X-rays, and all that were unknown relatively at that time. So all that also added to that. There was also worries about which is also something that is going to come back today with the current system about accountability and ownership. So when expert system came back and said, this is the medicine that you can recommend to this person, and if that actually aggravated the disease, and maybe let's say something happened to that patient, who's accountable, right? The adoption model was that a human doctor would actually sit in between the machine and the patient, so that some amount of ownership can be built by that human doctor. But the doctors are not willing to own up responsibility for a system which maybe this is something that we should look at today because we have all the other problems can be addressed. So therefore, maybe the field can actually be revived. So the current AI boom is mostly data driven, and as I said, this is what you're going to spend most of the course on. So you collect a huge amount of data, whether it is image data or consultancy data or money or other kind of data, and use that to make inferences. Okay, I told you with expert systems, and also there's a whole lot of AI which has nothing to do with machine learning. There are ways to model AI problems and solutions which does not require any machine learning approaches. Okay. So, but again, there are big topics to discuss. One of the key points about the current AI beam to get quality data, okay, and that is usually massively underplayed. It is like it's all there available, but it is not. And if you look at most of the data science or the work required in data science or AI, 80% of the time the AI person spends is in cleaning up data. Okay, because data is the king. Clean data is usually not available. So even when you, for example, you go to a doctor and the doctor asks you, do you have, how severe is the pain? I'm sure for the identical pain, 10 people will give 10 different answers. Because our ability to tolerate pain is very, very varied, right? Somebody can, even if a pinprick can actually make you scream in pain, whereas somebody, even a surgical cut can actually be born without too much of wincing your pain. So the quality of data that you get can be a concern for multiple reasons, right? So, and therefore collecting the data and cleaning is a major challenge. And when you talk about wonderful stories and tools and technologies, this is something that usually get underplayed, and that's actually one major concern as far as the current AI technologies are concerned. Software tools are not a problem because almost every company like Google, Facebook, Microsoft, everybody who's building AI-based systems are throwing away their code in open source, in public domain, so you can actually pick up world-class software tools to build systems. And remember that in the olden days, or even other than these AI times, none of these companies throw away their source code. Okay, and that is very clearly because the algorithms are not the issue today. The data is the issue, and the data is very hard to get, right? So you don't have to write too much code, and as I said, most of the work that you're going to do is with respect to the data. So just yesterday I was reading an article on COVID-19 and sleep, and it started off saying that a data scientist was looking at COVID-19 related patients' data, and he found a very high correlation between melatonin and COVID-19. Melatonin is the sleep hormone, right, the one that actually puts you to sleep. So this was a pure, he has no medical background and all that. So this initial association, which a data scientist actually brought out, then was published as a potential hypothesis. The medical community picked up, and now there is a lot of serious research saying that COVID-19 and sleep, there is a very strong link. Okay, now exact medical stories behind it, I'm not going to get into it, and nor am I competent to talk about it. But what is interesting is that purely statistical data analysis is actually throwing in clues for the medical community or the appropriate scientific community to pursue and explore. Now, for that community to discover these by their own observations would have been possibly a much more difficult challenge, because a doctor is not going to see a million patients, but a data scientist is actually going to see a million patients' data, right? So data science as a way to trigger hypothesis, as a way to explore potential links is obviously very high potential. Okay, and this was a very nice story that data scientists actually connected to this, and so now they are saying that along with washing hands and keeping distance, getting good sleep is actually very important. Okay, I mean, don't quote me on the reliability. You can look at that article. Okay. Similarly, Google has been talking a lot about its retina scan as a predictor of many diseases. again, usually this predictive model comes out first, and then you go and vet it and see whether it is statistically significant, whether it is, whether it is medically sound. And in some cases, if it is not known to be medically sound, maybe a fresh investigation would actually be launched to see whether that predictive modeling has any connection to reality. And that's what actually what happened with the COVID-19 and sleep. Okay. Similarly, I mentioned in the beginning itself that there was a huge number of attempts on disease profiling on arrival of COVID-19. But most of them bombed after the initial days because to indicate that making a prediction for tomorrow and day after is easy. Okay, even if you have 3 days data, you can actually make a prediction because in the short run, everything is a straight line. But when you look at the long run and ask the question, when will this peak? When will we start? When will the peak, the value numbers start decline? It's a difficult problem. Okay, and very few people have been actually able to stretch the prediction to that level. Okay, so today you don't find anybody talking about disease profiling, etc., because it's a difficult problem, right? So these stories show you the prospect of looking at data analytics for the healthcare, and also shows you the dangers of doing that, right? So it is wonderful if you have, for example, people are talking about integrating all the hospitals and medical centers across India under a common data umbrella, because it will help us to detect outbreak of any disease much faster than anything else, right? Because you can just aggregate a number of people reporting a particular problem across the country and then see whether it's a local problem or it's a more global problem, and what region is getting affected by that, and so on, right? So collecting data and making it available obviously can play a fantastic role as far as triggering healthcare related activities. But how far will it go after that? There are question marks which I think we should not overlook. Okay, so so healthcare data, you can get it as in terms of hospital records, medicine administration records, like medical shops would know how many particular tablets are being sold. Diagnostic test records, the scans, blood test. Blood test is usual numerical data, so not a big problem. But image analysis, because of huge amount of image-based diagnostic tests, is actually becoming very important, right? Even if I get an X-ray or a scan report, can I use that to identify whether the person has a disease or not? It's another very interesting class of problems, from scan images to disease predictors. So whether, for example, if you take blood cancer detector by looking at the shape of the blood, red blood cells and white blood cells. So these are all interesting areas for us to look at it. Here it is more of image analysis based things, which is something that deep learning has been doing fantastically well. The challenges is reliability of diagnosis and correlation with the test. For example, when a doctor advises you to get a test done, there is a lot of commercial interest and other things that is that may be behind it. So we don't know whether that test had a relation to the doctor's estimate of what the disease was, right? And even if you get a diagnosis done, and let's say your X-ray was taken and there was no problem found, the doctor's final recommendation as to what is this disease and this X-ray, this information is usually not available, because the doctor will say, well, we are okay, you don't have to come back. So the data that you have essentially stops there. So ideally, it would be nice if your final diagnosis or finally whatever was identified could also be fed into the system, so that from initially exploratory input gathering to the final diagnosis, the full information is available. That would have actually enabled you to make much better predictive models. Okay, so data usually becomes incomplete. Sometimes you go to a doctor, you get one level of things done, then you switch the doctor to someone else, again the reliability of the data goes for a toss, right? So challenge of quality of data in the healthcare area is also very significant. Another problem with the health data particularly is the highly skewed distribution. So a very small percentage of people in the population have a particular disease, and particularly rare diseases like, let's say, brain tumor or Alzheimer's or even COVID-19. It's a very small fraction of the population that has been affected, although the number looks large. Okay, so if I built a system which just looks at a person and say you don't have brain tumor, I am guaranteed of 95 to 99% success, because 99% of the people don't have brain tumor in the population, right? So the challenge is now bringing that 99% accuracy to 99.99 or 99.9999% success. Okay, so the number of positive cases that you're going to deal with or you're going to see is much smaller than the number of normal cases. So this creates a problem for any classification system or AI system to narrow down possibilities. If there were equal distributions, it would be much easier to identify what are the disambiguities or what are the properties which can lead to the classification, right? So, and the third question is, can health analysis be purely data driven? Will you trust a pure statistics to tell you what is wrong, what is right, and what you should do, what you should not do? Should we not bring in some amount of domain knowledge about whatever we know about anatomy, physiology, and other aspects of it? And this is something that today's AI systems do not know how to do, right? So, yeah, so the concerns, availability of data plus tools is not enough. Okay, all these issues like the quality of data and modeling are major concerns. Okay, the data required are okay. So this is also something that's bothering a lot of people. That if you want to do data-driven AI like what we are talking about, we need very detailed tracking information. Like we want to know what all medicines you took, what all you met, what all things you did in that period for me to check whether the analysis is meaningful, which borders on privacy concerns. You know, if I went to see a particular doctor, why should I make that information public, right? So you don't. I mean, this is the same problem that people had when you were doing tracking systems for COVID. It is good if I knew that when I'm sitting here, there are 6 people around me who are diagnosed as COVID positive, right? But in order to do that, you have to tell the system every place you are going, how long you are there, what and things like that, right? So which is an information that most people don't want to share, right? So privacy issues are a major concern when it comes to looking at data-driven models, and we need huge amount of data. So it's a major concern that is there. Similarly, ethical uses of data. That data may show you some predictors, but it may not be valid in practice. So, for example, if you collect data, if your data source is one particular community, okay, by caste, race, whatever you want the parameter, if it is one community, how much generalizable is this to other communities, right? We would expect that health data would generalize much better, but one has to establish that, right? So it may be used to kind of ethically, unethical usages can be could happen out of this. As I said, ML algorithms are largely statistical. Can we kind of assume that if I have all the data about everything from the start of the universe, I don't need any books, I don't need to study any classes, because all the knowledge is there in that data, right? You can equate knowledge to statistics. Modeling is very important, and so to identify what is meaningful, what is not meaningful is very important, and this is also something that you will find that most of the time do not get enough attention. So one of the major things machine learning so one of the major things about machine learning kind of thing is that you put any kind of data into that mixer grinder, it will grind and give you something. cameras or any of these deep learning systems and you put a bump into the data, you will get some output, right? So maybe a lot of data points have been ignored by the system. Maybe the data actually contains irrelevant information. Maybe critical data is not available. But whatever happens, because it is like a network model, it will come up with something on this output link. So it is very important that you look at the value, look at all the intermediate states and outputs like any error messages, warning messages, quality of data, quantity of data, bias in the data. All that has to be manually checked to make sure that your model from a domain model is good. Right? You also have to interpret, for example, if let's say you give it to a neural network and the system come back and say you have 0.1 probability or 0.1 chance that you have brain tumor. Should I ignore that and say, well, 0.1, no, that's a too small a number to forget it? Or should I still go and get it checked? Right? Well, obviously, if you say 0.9, you would expect that there is something more serious, something more definite. Right? So, what is the threshold of acceptability? What does the different numbers that is going to come out of the system mean? All these also need to be looked at very carefully. Okay, so with the sanity checking, output interpretation, modeling, and fairness of data distribution. Okay, and usually people don't tell you a lot about all these things, but these actually decide whether your AI model is sensible at all. Okay, whether the conclusions from this model can be trusted or not. Okay, so the old approach, the expert system kind of approach used hardly any data. Okay, so of course there was no data available at that time. It was all paper forms and all that at that time. So they did not use any data. It was completely knowledge based, right? The current system is exact opposite. It hardly uses any knowledge and is completely data driven. So maybe what you are looking for is some kind of a combination of these two things, right? You can make use of knowledge and also use the data. The data does contain very useful information, but ideally that inspection of the data should be through the lens of domain expertise. Every set of numbers, for example, so if you take any given set of numbers, you can always find the average. Okay, but if you say that the average of a set of numbers is 37, what does it mean? Really nothing you can talk about. But if you know that the standard deviation of those numbers is, let's say, 2 or 3, then you know that most of the numbers are around 37. Right? But if one number is like minus 500, another is 25,000, another is 3 lakh and something, and then your average is coming to 37, it really doesn't tell you anything about what the numbers are. Right? So, in some sense, machine learning is like finding that average. Okay. They may be useful, but you need to understand the data, you need to understand the domain to know whether that the conclusions given by these models are useful or usable. Right? What that average means depends on many factors. So, proper domain knowledge, careful data quality analysis, model selection, strong validation, these are all very important when you want to try out the model that you want to see and discuss in the rest of the course. And there is a lot of excitement over there. And one of the things that is very interesting is the field called explainable AI. As I mentioned earlier, most of the current AI models, like neural network based, given data, given the input, it will come back and tell you that this is the output, right? But it's not able to explain why that is the output, in a way that people can understand. Okay? And in domains like healthcare, diagnosis, and things like that, this is very important. Right? Nobody would go and undergo a surgery just because the doctor said go and take surgery. You would ask his explanation. What are the alternatives? Why did you end up into this conclusion? What symptoms did you see which was relevant to this, and so on and so on. So making AI explainable, that you can go peek into the neural network architecture or kind of create an interpretation of that neural network which is understandable to the human is a major area that people are actively working on. I mean, it's kind of like your human brain. So if you open any part of the brain, you won't make any sense out of it. When we presumably have a neural network kind of model inside. So even if I look at the activation potentials or the weight associated with this neuron, they don't tell you anything about the domain. But the way I am talking to you is not in terms of those neuron weights. Right? There is some kind of a modeler which has been put on top of that neural structure, which help me to articulate that information in a way that I can communicate with you. Right? So that's an important area for health, particularly for applications like diagnosis and all that. For building predictive models, etc. Yes, to know which direction the way the disease spreading is going to be, what factors are affecting the um, the formation of this disease, etc. I think obviously data-driven predictions are going to be particularly valuable. Okay, so I'm going to stop here so that when you have time for lunch and other activities. Okay, and but if there are any questions, I can still spend some time. That is my email address. The first one is my office email address, CDAC address, and the other one is what I use most of the time. So you can write to me if there are questions. I'll try my best to answer. Okay, so thank you, and over to you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Any question from participants?
They're all good participants. They don't ask questions. Okay.
So, yes, participant, you can please unmute yourself, and if you have any question, please proceed. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, sir. It was a wonderful presentation. I'm a doctor actually from healthcare field. I'm basically a dentist. I'm specialized in oral medicine and radiology. I have a doubt that actually patient specifically, there is a difference. No, even though the textbook has some common symptoms and patient treatment may be same, but there are times where, or at least a 10% variation is there with the patient's presentation and also treatment. So in such conditions, how do you have anything made up? Because we cannot tailor make a treatment plan. That's what I feel. And that is, I feel, is one of the drawbacks. And also I would like to know, is it feasible to make AI models for dental treatments? Is it feasible like that? Like patient has this amount of filling, caries, then we go to lipofilling, or if it goes deeper with pain, then root canal treatment, or if it goes still further, then maybe we have to go for extraction. So is it feasible like that, or have they made anything like that, sir? Or can you please?
I don't know. I haven't checked it, but I don't see why it is not feasible. Because see, ultimately, like what you have just now said are a good set of rules. So I can actually model them and do that. Now there are obviously a lot of different aspects to that question. So for example, when you say an AI system for dentist to support a dentist or even to kind of to act like a dentist, what is the input? So one way to do is that like a trained dentist would be there who can actually open the patient's mouth and look at and then report saying yes, cavity on 3 tooth and it is very deep cavity and blah blah. So you can convert what you see there in the mouth and enter them into kind of interpretable information like number of cavities, depth of cavity, the seriousness, color, whatever parameters, right? Now you can also look at even replacing that, because now you have those scanning devices, so you can actually put a scanning device into your mouth and take photographs, videos, and they could be automatically analyzed to arrive at these information also. So let's say a camera going inside can actually pick up and analyze, right? So the data gathering can also be done. Even there you need AI, because it's not enough to just take a picture. You We need to analyze it to see whether that's a cavity or is it some coloration, maybe some food particle is sitting there and all that, right? So that is one part of it. The second part of it is the inferencing, which is quite amenable to making like either through expert systems or with the other channels. Now the previous question was related to customizability of treatment, which is also something that AI is expecting to do quite well there because unlike a human doctor, there is more time and resources at the disposal of an AI system. So the system could come up with records and look at, for example, how much information do you know about a person when he or she visits you. Whereas for a system, you could actually have access to his entire history from birth to till now, what all medicines he has taken, allergies, reactions, etc. And he could say, no, this medicine actually might create a problem for him and he'll maybe avoid that, or he's coming from this area, or these medicines are going to be too costly for him. Why not?
The only problem I think in Indian setup, at least till now, we don't have data collection of patients too.
True.
Now only we are making it more of a digital one, and we are collecting some data from patients. Because
correct.
In the Western world, if you see patient walks with a card saying these are all my diseases and these are all my drugs. So here, so we have to really probe into the patients to get their history or their past medical and treatments.
This is not a technology problem. I mean, that's why I said, your primary challenge today is going to be data. And if, let's say, for example, if I want to build a dentist expert system or dentist system, I can sit with you and, slowly pull out these rules and then build up the system over a period of time. And sometimes, just identifying these rules from you. I mean, it is something that is very commonplace for you. You know, like the back of your hand. But you may not do so. If I ask you to list them down, you won't. And we are normally not going by the textbook rules. So textbook rules are the foundation rules. But what makes a doctor successful is the ability to adapt and customize these basic understandings and also build a layer of shallow rules on top. Like, for example, somebody says, I've been having fever for some time. Without even thinking so much, you'll say, okay, take a Crocin. Right? But you don't actually say, okay, let me do a complete biological modeling of how your system is and what are all the other things, whether, why don't you get an X-ray, MRI scan, CT scan, all that done, and then come to me, then I'll tell you to take a Crocin. You don't do that. So, but strictly speaking, if I have fever, you cannot tell me to take a Crocin unless you are guaranteed that, this is that. But we know that from practical experience and also by understanding the related things that taking a Crocin is not going to affect anything else negatively, and that it is safe to do. So these are rules which possibly a textbook is not going to articulate just like that. So which is what I call the expertise rules. Then there is the foundation rule, which says that temperature over 98 or something.
Exactly. Thank you so much, sir, for explaining. Can I have your email ID, sir? Can you please share your email ID?
I put it in the slide. I'll be reading it again. Yeah, you can see the email IDs there. Okay, any other questions?
Thank you so much for that explanation. Thank you.
Sure.
Yes?
Okay.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Sasi sir. Okay, for starting the session with AI in medicine, that is yesterday, now, and future, as well as the words on the precautions as well. Okay. So in the expert system components, that were the rule-based component, and explanation faculty, user interface, working memory, and the interface itself. Inference engine. Okay, and its importance and its uses. Okay. Thank you, sir, for discussing us with Hruday and Vidwan. The Hruday, heart disease advisor, and Vidwan, the inference engine. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Radhika ma'am. Okay. Thank you, sir. Radhika ma'am.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for delivering the session. We had a great session. Thank you. A lot of learning from you always.
Thank you. All right. See you. All the best for the rest of the course and have fun.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
participants are requested that if possible, please rename your team's user ID as participant ID underscore your full name so that it is easy for us to analyze the attendance. We are being able to download it, but for convenience to us, it will be great if you could just rename. For example, one underscore Radhika Kotecha will help a lot. We are downloading the attendance from Microsoft Teams. We will share a